Hi, welcome back. What percentage of test takers get a perfect score on their IELTS exam? Less than 1% globally. I happen to be one of them, and this is how I did it. A band 9 on the IELTS exam is the highest score that a test taker can get. And in this video, we're going to be discussing my study plan for it, including the time that I devoted to the exam, my individual score breakdown for each section, and general tips that I have for anyone who's interested in appearing for the exam. For anyone who doesn't know, here's a 30-second summary on what the IELTS exam is. The IELTS exam is essentially an English proficiency test for anyone who wants to work, study, or migrate to an English-speaking country. In order to do so, you must be able to prove your English proficiency in some way, and the IELTS is one of the ways to do that. Now, this includes countries such as the UK, US, Canada, or Australia. I personally took the IELTS exam when I was applying for my master's in Germany, which I'm currently pursuing at the Technical University of Munich. It has 4 sections: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And in each of these sections, you're scored on a scale from 0 to 9. 0 is the lowest score that you can get, and 9 is the highest score that you can get, and your cumulative score is also on the same range. I had a 9, 9, 8, 9 score on my listening, reading, writing, and speaking sections respectively. And in future videos, we're going to be discussing each individual section. So it'd be a good idea to subscribe if you want to appear for the IELTS exam, or share this information with someone who needs it. In this video, we're going to be discussing my overall study plan, including the number of hours I studied for the exam and my practice test scores. Now, just for more context, I took the exam when I was working full-time, so I needed to be as efficient as possible with my study preparation. So I studied for 2 to 3 hours per day for 3 weeks and eventually got the perfect score that I wanted. I think for the IELTS exam, it's extremely important to understand what the exam is, and that's important for 2 reasons. Number one, you want to individually break down each section, and number two, you want to make sure that there are no surprises on test day. So the obvious question at this point is, how do you do that? I think you should follow a 3-step approach similar to how I did it. The first step is to take a practice test. And in order to do that, I would suggest you set aside 2.5 to 3 hours whenever you're available, just to familiarize yourself with the test. The idea is not to get a perfect score on your first try. And now let's look at what my first practice test scores looked like. I took the first practice test around 3 weeks before my exam date. And as you can see, I got a score breakdown of 8.5, 7.5, 7, and 7.5 in listening, reading, writing, and speaking respectively, for a cumulative score of 7.5. Now, the lowest score that I got was on my writing section, and the highest score that I got was on my listening section, which was 8.5. Now for you, this breakdown might be completely different. You might get a higher score on each individual component, or you might get a lower score, and that's completely okay. The idea is not to get a perfect score. The idea is just to get to know the test, just to know what you should expect on test day. Now the second step is to honestly diagnose your score, and the operative word here is honestly. And what that means essentially is to understand where you currently stand and where you need to go. So let's look at my test score breakdown. I had a score of 8.5, 7.5, 7, and 7.5 on my listening, reading, writing, and speaking sections. The section where I scored the least was the writing section, and the section that I scored the most was the listening section. Now, granted, I've assigned the writing and speaking scores myself because, well, I don't have an IELTS examiner on hand, but this is where your honesty with yourself comes in. And just to give you an example of why I gave myself these scores, I knew that I was good at writing and I was good at speaking English, but I was out of touch with speaking and writing English. So it was just something that I needed to do in order to get a better score. For you, the situation might be completely different. So you might need to work on specific things, which again, we'll get into in future videos. The takeaway here is that you need to be extremely honest with yourself. Like most things about you, no one in the world knows your English proficiency level better than you. So make sure that you give yourself an honest score here, so that you know where you need to go and how hard you need to work over the next weeks or months. And the second thing to understand here is that this is just a starting point. This is just a practice test. You weren't expected to get a perfect score on your practice test. So it could be that you get a very low score on one of the components, or you get a cumulative low score. And that's completely okay. You've done the hard part, which is starting, and you're only going to get better from this point on. Now, the third step is to set a target score for yourself. And that's extremely important because that's going to give us a milestone that we need to get to. And this can vary widely depending on your circumstances. So you could be applying to your university and they might require a certain band level on the IELTS exam, or you could be applying for a job and they require a certain English proficiency level. Now, once you've done that, it's important to define the steps that you need to take to get to that certain level. So for instance, let's say you want to get a band 7 on the IELTS exam. Let's get into what you need to do to get to that level. And I think at this point, an example might help. So what I did personally for myself was I set up a very rudimentary pedestrian sort of plan. So I decided, all right, I'm going to do 5 more practice tests over the next 3 weeks. So essentially, on average, 2 tests per week. And after each test, I'm going to understand what my mistakes were and categorize them in 2 categories. I would understand if it was a content issue or if it was a timing issue. What does that mean? It means essentially that I was going to diagnose if I did not answer the questions correctly, if I did not understand what was expected of me as a test taker in that situation, or if I just ran out of time. If I didn't understand the content of what was expected of me, then that means I needed to do more research on what general tips are for taking a particular section of the test. For instance, if I'm doing poorly on the listening part, I need to understand what steps I need to take to get better at listening. On the other hand, if I'm running out of time, that just means that I'm lacking test practice and that I need to do more tests in a timed environment. Both of these aren't mutually exclusive. So if you get better at understanding the content, that might and eventually should help you complete the test in time. How do you solve these issues? You simply Google best practices for certain sections. So for instance, if I'm searching for the listening test, I'm going to search best practices IELTS listening. And a bunch of articles are going to come up, a bunch of videos are going to come up. It's important to understand that you're not aiming to memorize as many tips as possible. The idea is just to understand which tips you need. So what I would do is that I would look up 2 to 3 articles, 2 to 3 videos for each particular section, note them down, see the ones that were relevant to me, the ones that I wasn't doing, and then religiously try to practice them in my next practice test. Now at this point, let's take a step back and understand, what does this mean for you? First of all, it means that the number of tests that you take might be more than 6, or it could be less than 6. The number of weeks you study for the exam might be more than 3, or it could be less than 3, depending on where you currently are in your English proficiency level. And like I said earlier, no one is able to answer that question better than you. So be honest with yourself and write that score down. However, this does not change the core principles that we discussed, which is number 1, start with a practice test. Just do 1 practice test. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just run through it and understand what the exam is all about. And you'll find plenty of online practice tests which are free. You just need to search for IELTS practice tests online. The second principle is to be honest with yourself. In most cases, you will not have an IELTS examiner telling you how well you did on your practice tests, especially for the speaking or writing sections. If you want individual help, you can reach out to me and we can discuss that together. So it's extremely important to actually know what your English level is and where you need to get to. The third thing is to be very patient. English, like most things, requires time. So do not expect to jump from a 6 to a 9 score in a couple of days. I wish we had that magic pill, but unfortunately we don't. So there will be bad days where you can't or are simply unable to work on your IELTS preparation. Do not let those bad days dictate your entire study preparation. And it can get annoying because the IELTS is a long exam and you need to really focus not just in the exam, but also in your study preparation. Now at this point, you might be thinking, Saad, this is too basic. It is. It's supposed to be. Like I said, I was working full time when I appeared for my IELTS exam, so I needed to be as efficient as possible with my study preparation. You might be in a similar situation as well. So you might be studying, preparing for your master's while you appear for the IELTS exam, or you might be working like me. So it's extremely important to make the best use of your time by working on the core principles and learning by doing instead of getting bogged down by the nitty-gritties, which won't turn the dial in your favor in terms of your IELTS exam score. In the coming videos, we'll dive into each individual section and discuss my strategies for each of the individual sections. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, or email me at saadacontent@gmail.com. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.